and welcome back to Chess TV. In this week's episode we're taking a bit of a new route in the opening school. Amelia and Alfred are leaving the Nimzo Indian and wandering into the Queen's Indian instead. I should remind you that if you need to review some of the previous parts, you can find them on ChessTV.eu or on YouTube, but don't do that just yet. We also have a new chess puzzle. Albert has been reading Machiavelli again, and let's not forget the last part of the report from the Nordic Museum. Before I hand over to Albert, I want to tell you a bit about what's happening in the world of chess. During the past week, two huge tournaments have been played. The first is the Gibraltar Chess Congress, which's conclusion is on Tuesday, February the 2nd, and the second is the Tata Steel Tournament of 2012. The annual Dutch tournament, which is famous for gathering top players and pitting them together in excellent playing conditions, has once again been a huge success. In the second to last round, Aronian was in the lead, closely followed by Carlsen and Radjabov, so nothing was set in stone. The last round was played on Sunday the 29th of January, so the results and much more can be found on the official website tatasteelchess.com. But now it's time for Albert, so here we go.
In this week's episode, I thought we would talk a bit about territory. In chess, as in many other disciplines, it's important to control territory. It's not just about thoughtlessly scattering pieces across the board so that your opponent's pieces can't come out, because that kind of control can't be sustained for long. Instead, you have to deploy your forces so that it's certain that your opponent will not be able to win back the territory. Just as Machiavelli divided kingdoms into two categories, old ones that are inherited and new ones that are won, the fight for territory in chess can be divided into the same categories. The territory that you have control over from the very beginning of the game, the rows closest to you, and the territory that you win or take control of as the game unfolds. The first mentioned kind, which you've dominated for a long time, is easiest to control, while acquired principalities are a bit fuzzy. It's not easy to force your own visions and plans onto an area that has been in someone else's control. A number of problems arise. Like that, the pieces in the newly won territory often are poorly coordinated and they're set for an active attack rather than a passive defense of the position. The best advice that Machiavelli gives us in order to learn how to handle such a situation is that the prince must immediately move into the new territory. It's not enough to appoint your own officers to handle the situation. When taking over hostile territory, the prince has to make it his home. I don't necessarily mean that you have to move your king right into the action, but rather that you should focus your game onto the new area and let that be the focus of the struggle. Not only does that ensure you control of the game, but there's an added bonus of the psychological advantage you gain from forcing your opponent to recognize his defeat. Try out the theory, and we will return next week with the next part.
In the last week's episode, we analyzed the Nimzo Indian defense, and we did then see what would happen after White's fourth move, bishop to g5.
For some time we have analyzed the Nimzo Indian, so for this episode I thought it would be time to leave this opening for now and instead continue with the Queen's Indian defense, an opening which bears great resemblance to the Nimzo Indian.
The variation is introduced after White's d4, followed by knight to f6, c4, and e6. In the Nimzo Indian, White would play knight to c3 in this position, but in the Queen's Indian, White plays knight to f3 instead. Alfred, what difference does this make?
Well, since White won't play knight to c3, Black's bishop to b4 won't fulfill the same purpose. To still play bishop to b4 is of course possible, but white should now only block the check by playing bishop to d2. This means that black won't be able to use his bishop as an extra piece attacking the e4 square by pinning the knight, which acts as a defender in the Nimzo Indian.
So instead of playing bishop to b4 check, black might try to play b6 instead, building up the position. This variation was long considered to be a drawish line, but that changed after Kasparov introduced new and interesting ideas in the 1980s.
Since then, this variation has been played by a lot of different grandmasters, and the theory has gone through a rapid development. And the once timid variation does now require one to be quite familiar with it in order to play against it successfully.
White can mainly choose between three different continuations from this position: g3, a3, and knight to c3. Also, e3 is possible, but it isn't especially popular. g3 tops the list of the most popular fourth moves.
And it puts white's king's bishop on g2, fighting black along the h1 to a8 diagonal. A diagonal which was given black in the majority of the lines in the Nimzo Indian. It might seem natural to play bishop to b7 in this position, and it is a good option for black, but there are more variations to choose from. If black wants to play a more aggressive line, bishop to a6 is a possible continuation. Since white has played g3, the plan to protect the pawn on c4 using the bishop on f1 isn't recommended.
White instead should protect the c4 pawn by playing b3. This is the most popular line, but of course not the only playable one. Other than protecting the pawn, using the b-pawn, white can also play knight b to d2. This has never been an especially popular line, but it is quite interesting.
After white's b3, black plays bishop to b4 check, forcing white to block the check by using his bishop, and this is followed by bishop to e7. This might seem strange. Why check on b4 if the plan was to place the bishop on e7 all along?
Well, black does this in order to misplace the white bishop, simply from hindering it from placing itself on b2, and now follows bishop to g2 and c6. Black has as good as giving up the idea of placing the bishop on b7, and instead black blocks white from taking control over the diagonal by putting his pawn in the way.
c6 is only the beginning. Black wants to continue by playing d5, blocking the diagonal completely, and white can't do much to stop him. Another perk with d5 is that it also attacks the weak point in the white defense, the c4 pawn. Because of this, white plays bishop to c3, opening up for knight b to d2, enabling the knight to protect the c4 pawn.
After d5, the position has become very interesting, and white can mainly choose between knight b to d2 and knight to e5. Black has some weak points in his position, but so has white, making it so that both sides has equal chances in a very interesting position. But we will end this week's episode of the Opening School now. Next week we'll be back and continue analyzing the Queen's Indian, so see you then.
In today's chess puzzle, we're going to look for a checkmate in 2 moves that white performs on black. But the puzzle is actually more difficult than you might think at first. If you would get stuck, the best tip I can give you is to simply dare to try some more unusual variations and, of course, not to give up. So, white wins in 2 moves. Good luck. king is seemingly safe where he stands on c8, but the fact remains that he has no room to move around on because of our bishop on f4 and our rook on d1. Furthermore, we must remember that black is only one move away from checkmating us by moving down the queen to h2 or h1, and for this reason our first move must be a check. It's normal to instinctively want to capture the queen with the bishop and with a check, but that move is just not good enough here. Because what black does is to capture back with his knight and with a check, and then what we have to do is to move our king. And there goes our two moves, and we are not near a checkmate. That's why we just have to look for a better check. But don't waste your time on queen to f5 check. Black just captures our queen and we don't stand a chance to find a checkmate then. It is, however, all too easy to ignore the right move in this position, which is queen takes on c6 check. We force black to take back with his b pawn, and here's the trick part, namely to find the checkmating last move, which is bishop to a6 checkmate. So after this brain exercise, it's time for the final part of our visit to the Nordic Museum with Professor Arne Johansson. Here you go.
Förra veckan så började vi titta på objekt i samlingarna på Nordiska museet och vi hittade en hel del med schackanknytning. Så vi ska gräva vidare idag, så låt oss gå in igen och se om vi kan fortsätta våra efterforskningar på schacksamlingens område här. Ja, i Nordiska museets samlingar så finns en del objekt med schackanknytning med kunglig touch. Och vi har rört oss ifrån pyttesmå miniatyrfigurer, pjäser som är mellan 3-4 mm och 2 cm som Adolf Fredrik tillverkade. Och till ett bräde som är betydligt större än normalt som står framför oss nu. Och vad rör det här sig om för någonting, Karin?
Det här föreställer ju figurer som deltog i fransk-tyska kriget 1870-71. Här ser man den tyska kungen.
Ja, vi kan till och med fylla i här med vad som står på registerkortet, så står det så här att det är skulpterade pjäser som porträtt av kombattanterna i fransk-tyska kriget 1870-71. Konung Fredrik Wilhelm håller i kronan som hotar att falla av honom, vilket tyder på att konstnären hållit på fransmännen och utfört sitt verk före krigets utgång. Ja, de här är ju väldigt individuella. Alla pjäser föreställer olika karaktärer, och vi ser de tyska soldaterna med pickelhuva och tornen märkligt nog skulpterade som elefanter på gammalt maner för att representera tornen. Och ja, vi kan även se att fransmännens bönder ler och ser glada ut. valet medan de tyska bönderna ser betydligt kärvare ut. Så att vi får väl tro texten här att konstnären hade sina sympatier hos fransmännen. Men hur var det med den kungliga anknytningen då? Jo, det här spelet ska ha tillhört Oscar den andre som i sin tur också då passerade det vidare till Gustav den femte. Och när han avled så ska det alltså ha...
Det var då det kom till Nordiska museet.
Och ja, brädet, vi kan säga det står också här att det är utfört av furu och en kant i form av en vinranka gjord i björk. Men det allra intressantaste med det här är väl säkert just de olika figurerna och att det här också då har varit i kunglig ägo i Sverige och nu har passerat vidare till Nordiska museets samlingar. Och vi har idag kunnat visa upp det från gömmorna till Mitt i Schacks tittare. Så tack för hjälpen med det, Karin.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of Chess TV. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode and that you'll be back again next week. Before we end this episode, we actually have one more thing to show you. It was recently the 10-year anniversary of when Ponomarev won the World Championship, and in celebration of that, a tribute video was made by Macaulay Peterson. The full version can be seen on youtube.com/MacaulayPeterson, but for now, enjoy!